Good afternoon, Miss Sade. I started off my weekly log number 2 in an increased view of the PLA. I then decreased my view to better visualize the valve's function and heart chambers. I took a zoom view of the aortic valve to accurately measure the LVOT diameter. I did my 2D measurements in the decreased PLA view, both in diastole and systole. I also measured my LVOT diameter at least 0.3 to 1 centimeters off the annulus. I did end modes of the aorta, mitral, and left ventricle. I did color Doppler on my aortic valve. Here is a little trace of regurgitation that this patient has, and here it is live. I also did a color Doppler of the mitral valve, and again, this patient has a little trace of regurg, which can be visualized right here. I then took a 2D grayscale image of the RVIT, both in grayscale and color. I added a continuous wave Doppler, and you could see the leaflets closures. Just like the aortic valve and mitral valve, you can visualize a trace of regurgitation. I also did a 2D grayscale and color Doppler image of the RVOT. Here is the color Doppler. And I took a continuous wave Doppler on it as well. I could have measured the PV Vmax here. However, I forgot the measurement and added it later on. I then did a short axis of the LV, short axis of the mitral valve with colored Doppler, as well as a short axis of the aorta. I began to did a continuous wave Doppler with the RVIT, as well as a pulsed wave Doppler. I am just now realizing that the RVIT color Doppler without spectral Doppler was not included. However, I did do a pulmonic valve color Doppler with continuous wave. I ended up optimizing my image and being able to bring in more of that color flow in view, whereas in the first time around I did not get that in and was unable to measure the PV Vmax. I took a continuous wave Doppler of that and measured my pulmonic valve Vmax, as well as in pulsed wave. I went ahead and went back to the RVOT and accurately measured the PV Vmax, as well as in pulsed wave. I took a zoom view of the aortic valve with color Doppler as well, both in zoomed and not zoomed view. I then completed my polarimetry measurement in zoom view of the aorta. I moved into apicals, colored my mitral valve, and added continuous wave. Here it could be visualized the leaflet closure. In pulse wave, I measured the peak E velocity and peak A velocity. I moved on to my tricuspid valve with color and added in continuous wave. Here again, you can visualize the leaflet closure. I did this again in pulse wave. I did a VTI septal or medial and the right lateral, where the right side I measured the S velocity. I measured the medial and lateral, both E and A. I moved into my 5 chamber and added color Doppler. After I added color Doppler, I added a pulsed wave Doppler in order to measure my LVOT VTI. I did this in continuous wave to measure my AV VTI. I then used the Simpson's method in both diastole and systole of the apical 4 chamber. This gave me an ejection fraction of a 69.2. I also did an apical 2 chamber with color. I moved into my apical 3 chamber, added color to both valves. I took a pulse wave Doppler of my LVOT and measured its Vmax. I also took a continuous wave Doppler of my AV and measured the VTI. I moved into my subcostal 4 chamber and the IVC. I took the end mode of the IVC and had my patient sniff. I struggled with the suprasternar notch. I added some color to both sides. I ended up adding a pulse wave Doppler to the ascending aorta. I did my suprasternar notch, peed off, apical peed off, and right sternal border peed off. That is it for my weekly log number 2.